How one simple act of kindness lasts for years. Elon Musk helps stranded woman. 3 years later, she uncovers the shocking truth, and you won't believe what happens next. The night was freezing, the kind of cold that seemed to cut through every layer, no matter how many you wore. The wind howled through the empty streets, blowing dust and leaves around as Isabella walked along the side of the road. Her phone had died hours ago, and the night had crept up on her so quickly, she didn't realize how far she'd wandered. After a long shift, her car had sputtered and died, leaving her stranded in the middle of nowhere. Isabella kicked a stone off the road, glancing at her watch. It was past midnight, and there wasn't a soul in sight. She couldn't even get a signal to call for help. Just as hopelessness began to settle in, headlights appeared in the distance, cutting through the dark like a lifeline. A sleek black car slowed and pulled up beside her. The window rolled down with a soft hiss, revealing a man with dark hair and a warm smile. He offered her a ride, his voice calm and inviting despite the chill in the air. Isabella hesitated. She'd always been told to be cautious of strangers, but something about his friendly demeanor made her feel safe. She had little choice. She explained she was stuck and that a ride would be amazing. The man nodded, as if he'd already expected her answer. He told her to hop in. Isabella slid into the passenger seat without thinking twice. As the car roared to life and pulled away from the dark road, she felt a wave of relief. The warmth inside the car was like a contrast to the cold that had been gnawing at her for hours. The man didn't say much at first, eyes focused on the road ahead. Isabella tried to make small talk, but exhaustion from her long shift and the stress of the situation made it hard to keep the conversation going. She asked him what he was doing out so late, trying to break the silence. The man glanced at her, eyes twinkling. He responded with a smile, saying he could ask her the same thing. He was just passing through, he explained, adding that life had a funny way of putting people in the right place at the right time. Isabella chuckled, unsure if he was joking or being deep. She thanked him for showing up just when she needed it, admitting she had no idea what she'd have done otherwise. He smiled, his calm voice putting her at ease, saying it was just what anyone would do. The drive felt longer than it was. But eventually, the car stopped in front of a small motel. Isabella's place was further, but the stranger insisted she rest there until morning. It wasn't much, but it would keep her safe. Surprised, Isabella hesitated, not wanting to impose. He reassured her, saying everyone needed a little kindness sometimes. As she stepped out, she smiled and thanked him again. He nodded, wishing her well. Just as she turned to go, her heart skipped. He had called her by name. She hadn't said it. Before she could ask, he drove off, disappearing into the night like a shadow. Isabella stood there, puzzled but grateful, before heading inside to sleep. She had no idea that this small encounter would change her life in ways she couldn't have predicted. 3 years had passed since that night, but Isabella still remembered the mysterious stranger. His kindness had stuck with her, even though his face blurred with time. She'd moved on, got a steady job at a tech company. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Yet, in quiet moments, she still wondered about him. Was it fate or just a coincidence? Then, one afternoon, everything changed. Isabella was called into a meeting with the CEO. "Could you come to my office for a moment?" her manager asked, sounding a little too casual. A knot tightened in Isabella's stomach. She'd been working hard, hoping for a promotion, but the manager's tone didn't sit right. In the CEO's office, Isabella was met by a middle-aged man with a serious look, flanked by 2 unfamiliar faces. He smiled politely, but there was something in his gaze that made her skin crawl. The CEO smiled, explaining that they'd been impressed with Isabella's work and saw a bigger opportunity for her, a connection they believed would interest her. Isabella blinked, confused, unsure of what he meant by a connection. The man nodded and clarified. One of their investors, an unconventional figure in the tech world, was interested in working with someone like her. He spoke highly of the investor's remarkable vision. Isabella's mind raced. She'd heard rumors about wealthy investors using their influence to get ahead, but never imagined one would take an interest in her. Trying to steady her voice, she asked who the investor was. The CEO smiled too widely and gestured to one of the others in the room. "This is Mr. Elon Musk." Isabella's breath caught. The name hit her like a shockwave. But what truly stunned her was the warmth in Elon's eyes, the same familiarity from that night 3 years ago. Her mind raced back to the man who had picked her up on that dark road. His kindness, his easy confidence, the way he had known her name without her saying it. A chill ran down her spine. Hesitant, she stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. She asked if he had been the one on the road that night. Elon's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Yes, it was me." Isabella froze, disbelief washing over her. The stranger who had changed her night, he was Elon Musk, the man who had revolutionized tech, space, and more. "You're..." Isabella's voice faltered. "You're Elon Musk?" He chuckled softly, a sound that seemed to melt the tension in the room. "Yes, I am. And I've been keeping an eye on you, Isabella. Your potential, your drive. I think you've got what it takes to do something extraordinary." Isabella's heart raced. She could hardly believe it. She had spent the last few years struggling, working long hours, trying to make a name for herself. And now, here was this man, offering her an opportunity she couldn't have dreamed of. "But why?" she asked, still trying to process the shock of the situation. "Why me?" Elon's expression softened. "Because of that night. Because sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can lead to the greatest opportunities. I saw something in you that night, Isabella. You weren't just some random person. You were someone who, even in the darkest moment, kept her head up and showed gratitude. You didn't take that ride for granted. And that's something rare." Isabella stood there, overwhelmed by the weight of his words. She had no idea that a simple act of kindness, the kind that most people would forget, would have led to this moment. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "You don't have to say anything," Elon replied with a reassuring smile. "Just think about it. This could change everything for you, and for the world." As the words sank in, Isabella realized that this was more than just an opportunity for career advancement. This was her chance to be a part of something bigger, something that could change the world. Months passed, and Isabella found herself working alongside Elon on groundbreaking projects. The challenges were tough, but each one made her stronger. One evening, as they stood together on the rooftop of SpaceX headquarters, Elon turned to her. He looked at her with a satisfied expression, acknowledging her journey. Isabella had come a long way from that cold night, and he could see it in her. She smiled, reflecting on how far she had come. She never would have believed, just 3 years ago, that one act of kindness would lead her to this point. Elon nodded, as though reading her thoughts. It wasn't just the work they were doing that mattered. It was the connections they had formed along the way. At that moment, Isabella understood the true impact of that night. Life had a way of surprising her, and what began with a stranger's kindness had turned into the opportunity of a lifetime. Isabel had found her place, not only in the world of innovation, but in something even more powerful, human connection. It all began with one simple act of kindness.